Welcome to The Luminous, the podcast where we shine a light on human consciousness, personal sovereignty, and spiritual transformation and bring it down to earth. My name is Amar. For over a decade, I've supported people in reconnecting with their divine gifts, inner wisdom, and creative abilities. You are far more powerful than you've been led to believe. I intend to help you reclaim that power. My name is Amar, and this is The Luminous.
OMG! Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how excited I am to finally be recording the first episode of this new podcast. Hello everybody, my name is Amar, and this is The Luminous, the podcast where we are going to explore, discover, discuss, dive into human consciousness, personal sovereignty, and spiritual transformation. I have so many things that I want to share with you. You know, I've been thinking, well, truth be told, I've been thinking about this podcast for several years, but I've actually actively been working on it and creating it and actually rolling up my sleeves to make it since February of this year. I'm recording this episode in June of 2022. So it was just a few months ago that I finally said, okay, it's time. It's time for me to move on to this next level. It's time for me to create this podcast. And it's time for me to really begin to shift my perspective, my focus, and how I show up in service of others. So what we're going to talk about in this episode is I'm going to share a little bit about who I am, what I do, my history, my background. We're going to talk a little bit about this podcast called The Luminous. What is it? What are we talking about? We're going to talk about human consciousness. We're going to talk about personal sovereignty. We're going to talk about spiritual transformation. And within all of these discussions, you're going to begin to get a sense of who I am, what my perspective is, and the focus and the belief system that I operate within through my work and also in my life. I think that's one of the key things that I would like to begin with is that the days of me having a separation between who I am and what I do are gone. I am blessed in that my effort over the past 10 years to create a life for myself where I am my boss, although technically Spirit is my boss, but she trusts me. My point or my whole purpose was to get to the point where I had a life where I didn't have to separate. I did the corporate thing for a long time. I did the wage slave thing for a long time. I worked in other people's homes according to other people's rules, playing other people's games, and made them a lot of money. And then I just decided, you know what? I don't want a life that has partitions. I don't want to be Amar at work, Amar at home, Amar with his friends, Amar when he's by himself. I just want to be Amar, period. And I need to do whatever I can do to remove those messy partitions, to remove those separations, to remove those divisions. So while I can say my work has been building this practice for the past 10 years, to be perfectly honest, I don't really see myself as having a job. I don't really see myself as working. I have found what I love. I have found the things that inspire me and excite me and light me up, and I do them wholeheartedly and with gusto, with the intention of inspiring other people, with the intention of being an example of what is possible when you live according to your truth. I've had a pretty amazing life. And throughout this whole life, I've always had a sense that there was something greater, there was something else, there was something bigger going on than what we saw. I always was kind of tuned into what was going on beneath the surface. And at some point in this podcast, I will share a more personal story, and I will do an episode that perhaps touches on my own personal awakening experience. That's not what today's episode is about. But suffice it to say, in 2012, I finally had a crescendo to a very big awakening journey. And I finally acquiesced. I finally capitulated and said yes to Spirit, got out of my own way, got my head out of my ass, and said in 2012, I was living in LA at the time, I basically said to Spirit, I don't know what you want from me, but clearly you have information that I don't have access to at this moment. I will do whatever you want. If you get me to Seattle, get me a job, get me an apartment, as long as I am happy, self-employed, and helping people, I will do whatever you want, period. 3 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks later, this was June of 2012, so this is literally 10 years ago. About 2.5 to 3 weeks later, I was back in Seattle, had a job, had an apartment, and everything began to unfold before me. So it was back in 2012, 2013 that I finally decided to form my practice officially. And there were many iterations of my practice. There were many iterations of what I call myself. I think my current title is Energy Intuitive and Personal Transformation Guide, which is a mouthful, but I think it pretty well encompasses what I do. But I've had many iterations, I've had many titles, I've used many modalities, but the number one thing that has always been true, and this has been true from day one, where I really intend, and still intend to this day, to get my clients to the point where they don't need me anymore. You know, I came into this life with a few extra switches flipped on. I came into this life to be an example of what is possible within all of us. And yes, I can do some things that many people find to be pretty magical or impressive or interesting or whatever, and I don't deny any of that. And at the same time, there's nothing that I can do that you also can't do. I'm not special. I've just spent a lot of time in my life focusing on what's happening under the hood, what's happening under the surface, what's happening within this body called Amar. And I'm 50 years old now, so I can say really over the past 50 years, I've gathered a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom. I've gone through a big portal of remembrance over the past few years. So I've got a perspective and an awareness that can be very helpful. It can be very illuminating. And ultimately, what it all comes down to is I want you to remember the truth of who and what you are, that you are the sovereign authority in your life, that you are the creator of every single thing you have experienced. Yes, it's true. You chose it on some level. I promise, as scary as that sounds, it's still true, that there is no separation between who you know yourself to be and who you want to be, that there is no separation between you and the divine source, and that you are not in any way, shape, or form born a broken sinner. And then one more piece that I think is really crucial to my practice and my perspective. I am basically here to help you remember. I am here to help you remember all of those things and more. The things I was just talking about, your sovereignty, your authority, your divinity, your magic. All of those things are real and all of those things are actual. But all of those things can also be pretty abstract and pretty lofty. So what I love to do is I love to break things down and make them real, make them tangible, and make them accessible. That's why in the intro I say we talk about human consciousness, personal sovereignty, and spiritual transformation to bring it down to earth. I don't want you to perceive that this spiritual life is somehow separate from you and is somehow rarefied and only for a select group of individuals. No, everything is spiritual. Everything is in spirit. You cannot be spiritual. You are spiritual when you're sleeping, when you're going to the bathroom, when you're doing the laundry, when you're praying, when you're healing, when you're screaming, when you're crying, when you're laughing, because spirit is in all things. And one of the key pieces to my work is this. I believe with all of my heart that the fundamental reason we humans choose anything, from what we wear to what we eat to who we marry to where we live, is because of what we think the energetic, feeling, emotional, or experiential payoff will be. You don't want the car because you want the car. You want the car because of how it makes you feel. You don't want the house because you want the house. You want the house because to you it represents safety, it represents comfort, it represents success, it represents family. You don't want the money because you want the money. You want the money because it represents comfort, because it represents ease, because it represents, choice, because it represents freedom. So much of what I do is really about focus on how you feel. Pay attention to the voices that are running through your head. What is going on within your body when you say yes to things you don't want to do and when you say no to things that you're really excited about? So these are the ways that we begin to sort of unlock our own inner landscape, unlock our own inner temple, and reconnect with the center. Because when we find the center, we find self. And when we find self, we find spirit. It's all connected. And I'm so excited that we have an infinite number of episodes to get through because I have so much I want to share with you. And I've got a laundry list of topics that I've been working on for 10 years, more specifically the past few months. So I have so much that I'm excited to share with you. But again, this episode is just sort of laying the land, giving you a foundation and kind of introducing you to who I am and what I do. So we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what is the Luminous. It's a cool sounding name, but what's the point? My name's Amar. You're listening to The Luminous, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Amar, and you are listening to The Luminous, Episode 1. Welcome to The Luminous. So what is the Luminous? Well, I just like the sound of the name, to be perfectly honest. Luminous is light-filled. Luminous is the things that glow from the inside, right? We think of stars. We think of planets. We think of heavenly bodies when we think of luminosity. We think of the things that glow from within. You know, when you see someone who's glowing and you're like, oh my gosh, she's positively luminous. Look at her, she's just glowing. So to me, luminous makes me think of light, which is what it is, right? Lumen is light. So when I think of luminous, I think of light, and everything is light. Energy, information, even mass is just light that's been slowed way, way down. The cool thing about light is it can be a particle and a wave. So it can be physical and non-physical. It can be visible and invisible. So the luminous to me is pointing our focus towards the light, pointing our focus towards those who are lit from within, pointing the focus towards the things that light us up, pointing the focus towards the light with a capital L. So it gives us a lot of things to talk about. And the focus is human consciousness, personal sovereignty, and spiritual transformation. That gives us a wide range of topics, a wide range of areas that we can focus on. Ultimately, for me, it's about helping you remember so you can reclaim your seat of sovereignty. And we're going to talk about what that means in a moment. But really, part of it was practical. You know, I have a good friend and she has a podcast. And when I was thinking about finally pulling the trigger and saying yes to making this podcast an official thing, I was talking to her about, you know, her choices and, you know, what were the pitfalls that she found. And, you know, I was hoping that she could perhaps assist me in making some of the, or, prevent me in making some of the same mistakes she made or whatever. Anyway, we were chatting and she was talking about that podcast called Trigonometry. And they had at some point, and full disclosure, and this might sound really strange, but full disclosure, I don't really like podcasts. Mostly because I am not an auditory learner. I cannot just sit and listen. I have to be doing something. I'm a visual learner and I'm a kinesthetic learner. So I have to be visually engaged or I have to be physically engaged, doodling something, drawing something, doing something with my body, my hands, in order for me to really retain the information. So I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. Part of it also is because I don't drive. I don't have a car. I'm working on that and I will have a car soon. And I also, living in the middle of nowhere, I don't really walk. So I think the two times when people mostly listen to podcasts are when they're working out, jogging, running, walking, or when they're in their car. I don't do either of those things to the degree that I have a lot of time to listen to podcasts. Anyway, I digress. I was talking to my friend about podcasts and her podcast, and she was sharing with me the podcast Trigonometry. We were talking about names, and she had mentioned that in one of their episodes, they said that they kind of regretted choosing the name Trigonometry because it really, really narrowed them into a very, very limited scope of things they could talk about. Of course, now they're at the point where enough people know about them and they have enough followers and listeners that it doesn't really matter that not everything they talk about is being triggered or, topics that trigger. So the Luminous, for me, was a name that instills a certain perspective, a name that instills some ideas and some imagery, but that gives us a very, very big space to play within. So that's why I chose the name The Luminous. Another question that I've been thinking about, and a question that, several people have asked me, and I think it's one that bears addressing in this episode, is why am I starting a podcast? I've had a YouTube channel. You can find me on YouTube at Amar Energy. I've had a YouTube channel since I think it was 2013 or 20. Yeah, I think it was 2013 that I started that. So that's almost 10 years. I had a Facebook page for quite a while. I don't have Facebook anymore. I had an Instagram for a while. I don't have Instagram anymore. Actually, that's not true. I got rid of my main account and then had a personal account that I've since sort of shifted into an account for my practice. You can find me on Instagram at Amar Energy. There will also be an Instagram account for this podcast. Anyway, my point being, people were saying, well, Andrew, you already have a YouTube channel. You've got, 11, 12,000 followers at this point. You've got, a million views. Why are you starting a podcast? I think part of it was, number one, I find YouTube to be incredibly, incredibly broken. Whatever algorithms they're working with make it impossible sometimes to get your stuff seen. At the peak of my YouTube viewership, I was getting maybe 16 to 20,000 views a video. Now I'm down to less than 3,000. Now that to me is not necessarily a metric of success. Honestly, I've never been super, super obsessed about my viewership or my subscribership on YouTube, but it does tell me something. When the peak was 16,000 and now it's less than 3,000, that says something. And, YouTube is also just something that I question their integrity more and more. Their censorship is out of control. Their measures of control are out of control. Their perspectives are not ones that I necessarily agree with. And while I love YouTube for things like recipes, tutorials and how-to stuff, I find that anything like this sort of content where we're engaging, we're talking, we're sharing, it's more verbal, it's less visual, YouTube isn't really the great place for that. And frankly, to be perfectly honest, after 10 years of YouTube and after 10 years of my practice being so closely tied to my viewership on YouTube, what I found was I was starting to censor myself. I was falling into that trap that we call audience capture, which is where a creator such as myself suddenly finds themselves bound by their viewership in that they aren't necessarily sharing what they want to share or are inspired or excited to share, but they're more focused on sharing things that they think their viewership will respond positively to. And that to me really began to call into question my own integrity. If my job is to be a source of truth, if my job is to help you remember the truth of who you are, if my job is to help you remember that only you know what truth feels like and to remind you that truth is predominantly a feeling thing, how can I possibly live with myself or look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day when I'm not sharing what I'm honestly inspired to share? When I'm not sharing or saying specific things because A, I'm afraid of getting censored, or B, afraid of getting canceled. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about on this podcast may not be popular opinions. And a lot of the things that people expect me to believe in or expect me to support because they look at me and they say, okay, he's a white guy. Okay, he's a gay guy. Okay, he's single. Okay, he's spiritual. I have quotations around that. Okay, he has tattoos. Okay, he looks a certain way. People make a lot of assumptions about what my beliefs are. And what I find fascinating is that as I have come out of the closet, so to speak, with some of my beliefs that are contrary to what many people assume, I found a lot of people kind of getting twisted, kind of getting upset. And I found a lot of people dropping away, not paying attention, unsubscribing, unfollowing, canceling me digitally. And so I really started to question if the viewership and the subscribership that I have managed to gather over 10 years is so fickle that they hear one sentence out of my mouth that for some reason is counter or contrary to who they believe I am or what they believe I should be saying or speaking about. And all it takes is one sentence for them to unfollow, unsubscribe, and cancel me. How valuable was that relationship to begin with? How valuable is that viewership to begin with? And do I really want to be participating in a platform that supports that? The answer is no. The answer is no. And so for me, it also became kind of like, how can I reset this? How can I wipe the slate clean? How can I become new again? How can I go back to the beginner's mind? And the answer was, let it all go. Let it all go. Drop your Instagram, drop your Facebook, drop a lot of what you're doing on YouTube, drop a lot of your services, make a shift into a new platform, make a shift into a message that feels more authentic and feels like it has more integrity. And so that's what I'm doing. And ultimately, I will also be dropping my calendar. My goal, and I'm speaking this out loud here, it's June 3rd, 2022, by the end of this year, by December 31st, 2022, if not sooner, I will be at what I like to call zero calendar, and that I will have no clients. I will have courses, I will have workshops, I will have my podcast, I will have my media channels, and I will have my online community, which I'm currently in the process of building, and that will be it. Because if I can engage with one person for an hour, that's wonderful, and they had a beautiful session. But if I can engage with 100 people in a course for an hour, or 1 million people in a 45-minute podcast episode, or 10 million people on a Instagram post or whatever, then that makes things a lot easier for everybody. So the podcast is the beginning of a much bigger shift that's been in play and been in sort of building phase for quite some time. And here I am finally putting pen to paper, so to speak, and making it real. So that's why I am starting a podcast. That's why I got rid of my Facebook account with, what was it? Almost 20,000 subscribers. That's why I got rid of my Instagram account with almost 15,000 subscribers. That's why I'm turning my focus away from my YouTube that has, like I said, almost 1 million views and 12,000 subscribers, because I don't care about those things. What I care about is being a vessel for truth. What I care about is being a vessel for remembrance and wisdom, and an activator, a catalyzer to rattle your cage and wake you up so that you can reclaim your authority, exit the matrix, and get to living the life of a sovereign. That's what we're talking about on the Luminous, and that's why I'm starting a podcast. So when we come back, we're going to take another quick break. We are going to talk about human consciousness, personal sovereignty, and spiritual transformation. What are those buzzwords, Amar? What do they mean, and why did you choose them? We'll talk about that in just a second. We'll be back. Welcome back, everybody. This is the Luminous, and I am Amar, and you are listening to episode 1. Welcome to the Luminous. So we've been talking today about my background, been sharing a little bit about why I do what I do, been sharing a little bit about why I'm shifting away from, what most people would call a thriving practice, a thriving online presence. Amar, are you crazy? What are you doing? You've got the money, you've got the clients, you've got a stable, enough income that you don't need to. Why are you doing this? Why are you, pulling the rug from underneath all of it? Well, because that's life. Because what I have come to realize is the minute that my interest and my investment in something starts to wane, it's not necessarily because my human perspective has shifted. It's because from the higher aspects, my creator self, soul self, eternal self is saying, okay, we've done what we needed to do here. It's time to move on to something new. And I have learned at this point in my life, thy will be done. If spirit and self is moving me in a new direction, I am a fool to resist. It is futile to try and stop it from happening. So at this point in my life, I just surrender. And when I've been getting the nudge and the tap on the shoulder to make the shift, that's what I do. So The Luminous is my podcast, and we will at some point be having guests on, and I'll be interviewing people. But the first few episodes, or at least probably the first handful, are going to be me just kind of going through a list of topics of things that I want to talk about, things that I'm inspired by, things that I'm excited about, things I'm curious about, and want to share with you. But this episode, we're kind of breaking it down. And the tagline that I have underneath it, if you look at the image, it says The Luminous, host Amar, and then it says human consciousness, personal sovereignty, and spiritual transformation. So I shared a little bit about in the earlier segment that I liked the title and I liked that tagline because it was very broad and gave us a lot of room to explore and a lot of room to play without too much limitation. But I was very specific about human consciousness, personal sovereignty, and spiritual transformation. So human consciousness, to me, that title, human consciousness, that phrase, what is it to be human? We are spiritual beings having a physical experience, right? That's not my quote. I believe it's Wayne Dyer. I could be wrong, but I know it's not my quote. There's another way that I look at it, and that is we are limitless beings who came to play within limitation. What does that mean? Why did we do that? Why did I, this eternal infinite being, choose an experience in a body, in a, on a planet, in a physicality at a certain time in history and a certain time in human evolution and development? Why did I come back now? What is the material self? What is the creator self? What is spirit? What is the human connection to all of that? Where does the human find themselves on the spectrum? If we're talking about, moving from non-physical or trans-physical into a physical experience, if we're talking about moving from an idea or a concept, the wave, and then moving down into an actual experience of it, the particle, how does that happen? And what is the human's role? How does a human manifest? How does a human meditate? How does a human heal themselves? How does a human tap into their intuition? What is the original intent and the point of the human experience anyway? So human consciousness, two very simple words, 5 syllables, but a vast, vast range of topics and subject matter that we can dive into within that title. And then, what is the original intent of the human and how can we return to that? What are the latent gifts and abilities that each human possesses? What is this stuff we call junk DNA? Why is it that we all have these very similar experiences? I don't believe we were meant to struggle, slog, and suffer through life, only to maybe receive salvation after I die. I don't believe that. That's a total lie. Jesus wasn't crucified, right? He wasn't born in December. So there's so much, how can we liberate ourselves from the matrix? There's so much crap that humans have been force-fed. There's so much distortion and corruption and subpar programming in our consciousness, in our bodies, in our awareness, and we can shift it. I am living proof that we can reprogram our human, that we can recreate ourselves, not just in an idea and concept, but physically. So how do we do that? There's so much to explore there. Then we move into personal sovereignty. You are the creator, ruler of your life. You have dominion over your reality. Everything you have experienced has been chosen at some level. The two common denominators in everything you have ever experienced are you and spirit. All of these things are true. These are not platitudes. These are not concepts that are nice. These are not imaginary, fantastical ideas that I just created. These are true. And there are a lot of people that stand to gain a whole lot of everything by you not understanding or believing that. There are a whole lot of people out there that want you to believe you need someone to rule you, that want you to believe that you need a master, that want you to believe that you need to be managed. None of that is true. None of that is true. And I know it's not true because I live it, right? So Spirit has given you everything you need. Like I said earlier, she has seen fit for you to exist. She gave you a body. She gave you a consciousness. She gave you a soul. She gave you a timeline. She gave you a purpose. She gave you a team of helpers. So who is anyone to deny her? You don't need anyone's permission to exist other than hers. You don't need anyone's permission to be who you are other than your own. You don't need anyone's permission to share, to express, to speak, to write, to draw, to sing, to dance, whatever it is that you believe in, what you want to see in the world other than your own. You don't need anyone's permission to be well or healthy other than your own. And all of these things are things that we have been programmed to believe otherwise, right? We're also going to talk about choice within the concept of personal sovereignty. Choice is a mechanism for growth. But choice is not chocolate or vanilla. Choice is not, am I going to stay or am I going to go? When we're talking about the things that you chose and the things that you've created, which is everything. And when it doesn't make sense from the human's perspective, it's always a sign that the pieces are being moved from a higher level of your awareness, but it's still your awareness. So choice is a mechanism for growth, yes. But when I say you chose that, I'm not talking about choice of chocolate or vanilla, should I stay or should I go? I'm talking about choice over time. I'm talking about every single time that you wanted to speak up but didn't. I'm talking about every single time you wanted to say no but didn't. I'm talking about every single time you wanted to say yes but denied yourself. I'm talking about every single time you continued to show up one more time to the thing that insults your soul and that you cannot stand doing, and yet there you are still doing it. That is choice over time. So if someone has spent 15 years choosing against themselves, can it be any surprise that they find themselves living an experience where they are denied at every turn? Of course you are, dear. You're the first one in line to deny yourself. Everyone else that falls after you is simply reflecting to you the reality you have chosen over time. So yeah, it's choice. It's choice. But here's the key. When you begin to accept and you live from the truth that you chose it and you created it, then you realize, oh, if I chose it, I can unchoose it. And if I created it, I can create something new. Right? The sovereign is, period. There is one claim that the divine makes, and it is, I am. And that is it. Everything else that comes after it is what we insert into our experience. So did you know that you have an interconnection point to your sovereign self? Did you know that you are always with you? Did you know that there is a layer of your awareness that is always healthy, balanced, thriving, alive, is never invested in your struggle, is never invested in your suffering, never sees you as anything other than the divine, brilliant being that you are? And if you want to know how to access that part of yourself, if you want to remember how to live life as the sovereign, stick around and you're going to remember. That's part of what these episodes are going to help you do. And then we move into my favorite one. And this is where we're going to wrap the episode up. Spiritual transformation. Spiritual transformation, what does that even mean? Here's how I see it. Healing is for the human. Healing moves us backwards. When my arm is broken, I go to the doctor so that I can heal it and go back to when it wasn't broken. I go to physical therapy after my injury so that I can get my body, my muscles, my joints back to the way that they were before the injury. So healing takes us backwards. Healing is for the human. Healing is a necessary requirement for transformation. Healing is the beginning. And so when we're healing, what we're doing is we're starting at our current point in space and time, and we're going backwards. I go back to the time in my 20s when that thing happened. I go back to the relationship in my 30s where that thing happened. I go back to the time at 12 years old, 7 years old, 5 years old, infancy, whenever, when that thing happened. Right? And we do whatever work we need to do to reconcile that, to balance that, to heal that, and release that. Then we integrate that. But that's just the beginning. The next layer, which you would be amazed how many people stop at healing. And I think part of it is that we don't even know that there's another choice after healing. We think, oh, I'm healed, and now I'm done. Transformation is where we go beyond healing. Transformation is for the sovereign. Transformation is for the self with the capital S. Transformation takes the human with it and levels it up in all ways. Transformation moves us forward. And here's the key. Most people stop at healing because in order to transform, you must move beyond the threshold of healing. Here's what I mean. You can leave your history behind. And what I mean by that is we talk a lot about the role of the survivor, and it's an important one, right? I survived this illness. I survived this marriage. I survived this drama, this chaos, this trauma, this pain, this wound. I survived. Yes, you did. You made it. And now here you are. But here's the trick. Even the role of the survivor is rooted in the trauma or the wound. Because how could I be a survivor if there wasn't anything to survive? And if I'm constantly walking around talking about how I survived, then I'm not fully healed. Because most people are content to spend the rest of their lives walking around talking about how they made it out alive and are now a survivor. And yes, you are, and I will never take that away from you. And hanging out in the survivor role is a perfectly fine place to be if you should so choose. But what many of us don't realize is that we are still telling the story from the perspective of what it is that we survived. If you didn't have the trauma, you would not have needed the surviving. So you can get to a point where you are no longer seeing yourself as a survivor because you have completely moved on from that experience. Your trauma may shape you, but it does not have to define you. You can be of the world, but not in it. My mother's name is Nancy. I do not introduce myself as the son of Nancy. At some point, I had to take my identity and move it into one that was not attached to my mother. Right? It's the same thing. At some point, I, speaking about my own experience here, had to take my experience, my past of PTSD from bullying and trauma and all the horrible things that happened to me as a child growing up in small town Wyoming. At some point, I just had to get sick of telling that story. At some point, I just had to decide that that's not who I am anymore. At some point, I just had to decide that is no longer on my resume. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Doesn't mean I don't acknowledge it. Doesn't mean I didn't go through deep healing. Doesn't mean that I was not on my hands and knees crying, soul crushing crying for so many years as I was moving this trauma and this pain and this wounding out of my body. But once it was gone, what I realized is the last thing I'm going to do is print that on a business card and carry it around with me, looking for anybody who will sit here and let me tell them the story of the horrible things that happened to me and how I survived. No, I'm ready to move beyond that. I'm ready to transform. There is a higher level available. There is a higher octave. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about is how do we access that place? How do we move from identifying ourselves with our suffering and our trauma and our wounding? How do we decide that we're going to talk more about the things that made us and less about the things that broke us? Talk more about the things that are your sovereign, deliberate, conscious, on purpose choices, and less about the things that happened when you were asleep and unconscious and unaware. So that's a snippet of what we're going to talk about on this podcast. I hope you'll join me. I hope you'll stay with me. You're going to be able to find me on pretty much any platform, any channel. I'll still have my YouTube channel, Amar Energy. I'll still have my Instagram, Amar Energy. I'll still have, there will be a Luminous podcast Instagram as well. I'll get around to it eventually. But that's what we're going to talk about on this podcast. This is a podcast for you. This is a podcast to inspire, to elevate, to remind you. This is a podcast to give you framework for tough questions. And here's what I want to leave you with today, because what's super important to me is I give you also tools, ways to apply it, make it accessible, make it real, and make it actual ASAP. So the first thing that you're going to do is begin to pay attention to how you feel. And this is not for any other reason than just to begin to become aware of your inner landscape, because your inner reality is the primary one. The outer reality is the secondary one. And if you want to see the outer reality reshape and reform itself, I guarantee you the fastest, most efficient, most effective way to do that is to begin by reshaping and reforming your inner reality, your inner landscape. So here's what you're going to do. You're just going to start to pay attention to how you feel. When that person that you don't like comes into the room, what happens in your body? When you're getting ready to drive to the job that you say you love, what happens in your body? When you're on your way home and you're driving back to the house, the relationship, the apartment, the whatever that you are so excited about, what happens in your body? When you're doing things you don't want to do, but you have to do them anyway. When you're saying no to things that you wanted to do, but for some reason you denied yourself. All of those times when you're saying one thing, are you feeling another? Are you feeling exactly what you're saying? Are you saying exactly what you're feeling? This is a really powerful way to begin to become aware. Where is the gap between your inner experience and your outer experience? Where is the fallout between what you want and what you allow, between what you desire and what you claim? And it all begins with how you feel. So start paying attention there. Thank you so much for listening. I am so happy you're with me. I cannot wait for us to go on this journey together. You can reach me at podcast@amar.energy if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have ideas for topics. I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you soon. I love you. Goodbye.